So, for those of you who don't know me, my name is LiAnna Davis. I will be your moderator today on today's speaker series. I am the Chief Programs Officer and Deputy Director here at Wiki Education. And Wiki Education is a small nonprofit organization, and our work connects Wikipedia and subject matter experts in the United States and Canada. And so we run two core programs. Our flagship program is our Wikipedia student program, and that's what we'll be talking about today. We support college and university faculty in the United States and Canada who want to assign their students to write Wikipedia articles as part of the coursework. And then we run a second program, our Wiki Scholars and Scientists program, where we actually run courses on how to edit Wikipedia and Wikidata. And so if you're interested in either of these programs, my colleague Colleen will post links in the chat. If you're interested in teaching with Wikipedia, you can visit teach.wikiedu.org. And if you're interested in taking a course with Wikipedia and learning how to edit yourself, you can visit learn.wikiedu.org. And before we begin, I want to just share a couple of notes. We anticipate this. There's already more than 200 folks here on the call. We're so excited you're here. We're expecting the chat to be very active during today's discussion. And so in order to make it easier to surface the questions for the panelists that you have that come up, please use the Q&A bar. It's located in the bottom of your Zoom bar there, and type your question in on the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen there, and that will enable it to have the questions come to us on the panel. And but feel free to chat with other attendees and discuss what we're saying in the written chat as well during the webinar, and we'll have time at the end for those questions and answers. So with that, I think it's a great time to get started. So I'm going to ask each of the panelists to quickly introduce yourselves and briefly share the context in which you've engaged with Wikipedia and Wiki Education. And Kaylea, you are first on my screen, so I'm going to ask you to go ahead and start.
Hi, I am Dr. Helaine Champion. I'm a professor of computer science at University of Washington, Bothell. And the context I've used the Wikipedia assignment in is teaching students about online communities and how they can learn about both how those communities work and engage with them in ways that sort of meet various social scientific theories, as well as make a real contribution.
Great, thanks, Kaylea. And Joseph, you're next.
Hello, everyone. I'm Joseph Reagle. I'm a associate professor of communication studies at Northeastern University. And like Kaylea, I teach a capstone course where we use Wikipedia as a semester-long engagement to basically as a case study, but also to make a substantive useful contribution about what we know about online communities and some of their dynamics.
Thank you. Ximena.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ximena Gallardo. I am a teacher of English at LaGuardia Community College in the City University of New York. One of my courses, I've been teaching with Wikipedia since 2014, and one of my courses that's about research. It's a research class, and this semester I decided that I would add, investigate generative AI in this research course along with my students.
Okay, and I'm sure we will hear more about that as this discussion goes on, Ximena. And last but not least, Helaine.
Hi, I'm Helaine Blumenthal, and I am Senior Program Manager of the Wikipedia Student Program at Wiki Education. So I am the person who oversees the program that all of these other folks on the panel with me have participated in. And I'm located in the Bay Area, and I've been with Wiki Education coming up on 11 years. So I've been doing this for a long time.
All right, thank you all. We have a great group of folks today, and I'll start off with Kaylea with a question for you. So you've taught with Wikipedia through our program, but you also research generative AI. Can you share a bit more about your research and any thoughts you have about how generative AI can affect Wikipedia, either positively or negatively?
Sure. So I study how people work together to build amazing things online, like software and Wikipedia. So everything is sort of connected here. It's a little bit Ouroboros. My particular study on generative AI is looking right now at how the sort of plausibility of the sort of fabricated text that gets generated can mislead us, cause us to waste our time, lead to cybersecurity threats, as well as information sort of or misinformation sort of risks to us, and further sort of digging into how engagement with things that used to be a genuine human interaction can lead to sort of a social model collapse, and how the sort of social arrangements that sustain these amazing resources can be broken apart when you start to intervene at different points with a synthetic interaction instead of a genuine interaction. Um, Another sort of element, I think, in all of this is that disproportionate effort between what it takes to create some of the synthetic text versus what it takes to engage with, detect, clean up, deal with, grade, whatever it is, the sort of this very asymmetric relationship between the effort to produce and the effort to respond to, analyze, et cetera. So that's it in a nutshell. Love to talk about it more.
Okay, great. What connections do you see between your work and Wikipedia, or how do you see it? How do you apply the sort of research you've already done to the community of content contributors on Wikipedia?
Yeah, so I think that the plausibility risk is one of the biggest one that overlaps with Wikipedia. As a instructor, you see text come in that you know was not written by the student. You can just sort of feel it, or you have some sense from the references that are fabricated. You're like, okay, this is a case where a student has produced material through generative AI, and it's bad, it's incorrect, and it's damaging. So there's that sort of instructor perspective of, you know, how that synthetic text sort of impacts that interaction and that learning experience for the student. And then there's just that sort of bigger picture element of like, okay, we've taken it upon ourselves working in the Wikipedia assignment to put this out into the world. We have an obligation, a strong obligation, to make sure that that is excellent quality work, that our students get a great experience, absolutely, but the general public is also counting on us to make sure that their information environment is clean as well. So I think that this sort of disproportionate impact and the strong kind of plausibility of the text that comes out are sort of the biggest areas of concern and overlap, and sort of where we as sort of academics engaging with both Wikipedia and AI need to focus quite a bit of attention. And I think that starts with helping students understand how this stuff is how the sort of text is generated, how to use it appropriately. It sort of it hits multiple points along that kind of sort of continuum of thinking. But I think that it starts with understanding it ourselves and understanding that obligation that we have.
Thanks, Kaylea. And yeah, I think that obligation is something that we have all felt as Wikipedian editors ourselves, as well as for those of you who are assigning your students to edit Wikipedia, that obligation to make sure the content that they're adding is correct and true. And I think, you know, that was obviously true before generative AI, but generative AI has added a interesting sort of element to that makes it potentially more challenging or to identify, although as Kaylea said, sometimes it can be pretty obvious. Ximena, do you
I
want to
would
jump
say
in?
it's
Yeah,
burdensome, you know,
it's
like
burdensome. Yeah.
really, you know, it's puts a burden on us that we didn't have before. And I'm gonna talk a little bit about it later, but I think that what Kaylea is saying is totally spot on. Yes.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Joseph, I know this is related to your work as well, and you're both a Wikipedian yourself as well as an academic researcher who has studied Wikipedia and is studying generative AI now. And you have a deep understanding of the community dynamics at play here. What are some of the challenges and opportunities for Wikipedia with regard to generative AI?
So I do think working with students that generative AI is going to be useful as a set of tools. So for instance, maybe finding topics you might write an article about or understanding policies. Wikipedia is very difficult to understand often for myself included, but especially for newbies in terms of a lot of the policies and the technology. So even though I love the Wiki Edu tutorials, I think that it could be a useful assistant to help people come to terms with how to engage with the community and edit Wikipedia, but dangers include the verisimilitude of the or plausibility of the answers that are given, and they might not in fact be right. Wikipedia has also had a history of people using automated means of producing lots of content on Wikipedia, for instance, the Scots language version of Wikipedia. And then when the community realized what was happening, the person behind that particular effort didn't actually speak Scots, so it was kind of a mess. So then all that content had to be rolled back. So I do see it as a double-edged sword, like I see a lot of technology. Both will offer some tools, I think. It maybe would be helpful with respect to plagiarism, for example. I mean, with translation, for example. But it could also get out of hand and become a problem. And then when it comes to plagiarism, that is an obvious problem. And I haven't really bumped into that issue in my classes yet with respect to the Wikipedia assignments. I am facing the burden of students writing essays and reading responses and using generative AI to plagiarize. And, 5 years ago, I might catch a student using something off Chegg or hiring someone as a tutor. And now, for the most part, it's using AI inappropriately. But it is a tumultuous time. And I think, like a lot of the people in the panel probably, uh, I'm trying to figure it out as I go along. So I'd be happy to talk about specific course policies and things like that. But as I tell my students at the beginning of the semester, which starts very, very soon, my policies might be different from other teachers' policies, which might be different from Wikipedia says or what Wiki Edu says, because we're trying to figure it out. We don't really know what's going on yet.
Yeah, and I think I will turn to Helaine in a minute here because Helaine could share some of what our policies are and sort of what training materials we've created and kind of the guidelines we've done that. But Ximena actually purposefully used generative AI in her class this spring. So Ximena, can you tell us a little bit more about your motivations for encouraging your students to use Gen AI specifically for the Wikipedia assignment and how you incorporated it?
Well, so coming back from the Wiki Conference North America, I was very excited about, going back into the classroom and starting to do Wikipedia assignments again. And then at some point, we had an editathon in Wikimedia New York City, and I had just downloaded Notebook LM, which is one of the tools is slightly different in terms of how it works. Or back then it was slightly different from the way it works from the rest. And I couldn't resist to try to create an article using it, right? This is a tool where you choose all your sources, right? And you can actually check whether the output, is connects to the sources. It's a good version of the sources. And so I made an article for the International Salsa Museum, and I found the tool really useful, right? Because it got me started thinking about how to set up the article. It gave me some ideas, and I was like, okay, so in about an hour, I had a start class article for the International Salsa Museum that, of course, I had vetted and checked all the sources, etc. And so my problem was that I confused myself with my students. I'm an expert editor, and my students are beginner editors. So I thought that because I could do it, they could do it, right? So I said, let's see if they can create individual start class articles using specifically Notebook LM. So the class that I teach tests different types of, generative AI, so ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, blah, blah, blah. But we focus on Notebook LM because the students have more agency, right? They choose their sources, they find their sources with a librarian, right? They read the sources using Notebook LM, and then, they also can check to see if whatever the output is corresponds to, the source that they want to use. So that's the reason why we use that particular tool to write the Wikipedia article. But like I said, unfortunately, I was confusing me with them. So it was, eh.
Yeah, do you want to share more about sort of your outcomes
Well,
there?
I don't want to take over, but let me put it this way. The students who were very good students really could use the tool beautifully, right? And created useful articles that, had the right balance, et cetera, et cetera. But I think that the main problem was that even though the whole class was about the limits of these tools, right? And testing them constantly, right? For different research skills. And the students, by the time that they got to the Wikipedia article, they really were aware that the tools were very limited. Like they really understood that. When Notebook LM produced that gorgeous, huge. And this is one of the things that, why I was saying Kaylea so right. It's, this huge text, right? They were so overwhelmed by what they saw that I would say about 2/3 of the class was not able to really revise the way they would have revised their own drafts, right? Because they were overwhelmed, not just by the length of the thing, even though they asked for a start class article, but also because it looked so good, right? And so it was very hard for them to figure out how to insert themselves to like revise, right? Even though, there was a first draft and, they, once that text was produced, then about 2/3 of the class kind of reverted back to, oh my God, this looks beautiful. I'm like, really? Didn't we just, go 2/3 on like how these tools have limitations? So yeah.
Ximena, I'm curious, did it produce wiki syntax, or was it something that could be pasted into the what you see is what you get editor window, and how did it do the citations?
Well, the Notebook LM basically kind of works like Wikipedia. And if you've used any of the research mode bots, you know what I'm talking about, where they, it gives you text and then it gives you a citation to the source, right? So it's pretty much like Wikipedia. It has footnotes, let's say. And so you can hover over the citation number and then it will literally tell you in which part of the text, the source text that you uploaded to it, it's using it from, so you can compare, right?
But were
So
students then copying and pasting that, or they had to do that edit themselves?
no, it creates the entire article and then it tells you, I got this from here, I got this from there, I got this from there, right? And of course, the idea is that if you have read these before, if you've read the sources before, you can say, yeah, you're missing something here, so we're going to add this, or no, this is too much, we're going to delete that. And I could do it for the International Salsa Museum, but my students, they couldn't, it was too much. It was no, right? Yeah. So there we are.
Yeah, Ximena, I think that's a really valid. I mean, I'm so glad you tried this, right? It's always good, and I think, the learning that you got out of it that you just said, right? That it's easier for you. You're a subject matter expert in both the content area and in Wikipedia policy, and you're a good researcher. And so you were able to sort of apply your human brain and your critical thinking skills to be able to take the output and then do something with it. And I think it's that nexus of you being both a subject matter expert, a Wikipedia expert, and a good researcher to be able to sort of do that. And students mostly don't have the Wikipedia expertise to be able to do that and are still learning the sort of subject matter expertise and the research expertise.
And also, if you think about it, I added expertise in AI. So you have
Yes.
3 things. They have to be experts on Wikipedia, they have to be experts on the subject, they have to be experts on how to use the bots properly, and hey, let's not forget how to write well. Oh my God.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
pretty much I gave them an impossible assignment.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So I think, Ximena, based in part on the work that you did on helping us think through this and the experiment that you did this spring, as well as input from a number of other faculty members, I think Wiki Education has rolled out some new resources and some new guidelines. I know we've gotten a couple questions in the chat about this. So Helaine, I'm going to just turn this over to you now to share. Maybe you can share a little bit about sort of the trends you're hearing from across faculty at different kinds of institutions and different disciplines, and then share some of the resources that Wiki Education has created and the guidance we're providing for faculty who teach with Wikipedia.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just want to say, I mean, I think everything that has already been expressed by the other panelists is like what I'm hearing from many, many other faculty in our program. So I'm in a position where, I get to interact with, hundreds of faculty every semester. And I think like here, I'll give sort of the top level, like prevailing concerns, themes that, that I've been hearing. And I think number one is just that, okay, like bottom line, students are using AI and they're using it a lot. um, and and I think Joseph, you said this, that like, and there's no single policy, like each professor is coming up with their own policy, and the institution has its own policies, and a lot of these might even be contradicting one another, or kind of at odds with one another. And so I think students are in a position where they're using this tool, but they're getting a lot of different guidance on what to do with it. And so I think what I'm hearing from faculty is that, they're really looking, they understand that their students are using it, and they're really trying to come up with ways. Most of the faculty I'm talking with are like, listen, the horse is out of the barn. So, they're using this. How do I teach them how to use it effectively? Very similar, I think, to a lot of the motivations why professors initially adopt the Wikipedia assignment, in the sense of, right, students are using Wikipedia, let's teach them how to use it well. So I think those are similar motivations there. And not just to use it well, but to truly understand like its limitations, and to get students to understand, I joke about this phrase, but I think it's really true, like why their human brains, why their critical thinking is actually still important and better than what AI can do in many, many instances. Um, and so, uh, and I think the other thing too is the faculty, what I'm hearing is like they're really struggling to find an assignment where students care about the output. And so this is actually something that's always been the case with the Wikipedia assignment, that the public facing nature of it, the fact that millions of people could potentially read what you're adding to Wikipedia, has always been a motivating force for our students to kind of do a little better, to take it a little more seriously, because they know that people other than their professor or their TA are going to be reading this. And so I think a lot of faculty are looking to the Wikipedia assignment for the same, for the same reasons, that, hey, maybe because it does have this public facing nature, there's this extra layer of accountability. Students are going to be a little more vigilant and not just dump some generated AI text into Wikipedia. So and then I think, we said this, I think, Kaylea, you said this at the beginning, our faculty are really concerned about not, one faculty put it to me this way, like not contaminating Wikipedia. They want to make it better. Um, um, and they want to figure out like what are the most effective ways to use AI tools to help their students to do that, to make Wikipedia better, but to also actually still give their students the experience of researching, writing, thinking critically, and ultimately like being proud of the work that they produce on Wikipedia. And so those are some of the big trends that I'm seeing. Um, and then in terms of Wiki Education's policy, so based on these trends, and then based on a lot of input that we've gotten from faculty, as well as from the Wikipedia editing community. So we have now developed a training module specifically on how to use generative AI tools with the Wikipedia assignment. I don't know if we're able to share that, LiAnna, in the chat or not, but every class we are
Colleen
currently
will
supporting.
share that link in the chat.
Okay, awesome, great. So every class that we are currently supporting will have this training module on their course, and we really want every student to take this training module, and it's one that, like, if your students are going to do any training module this semester, please take the I mean, you should do all of them, but please take the one on generative AI. And we're also including like guidance on generative AI at each step of the Wikipedia assignment. Okay, so you are at the evaluating your article stage, or at the bibliography stage, or at the drafting stage. Like, what are the best ways to use generative AI? And so very high level, I'll get into like what actually are our recommendations. Very, very high level. I would say what we do not want is for students to simply copy and paste text that an AI chatbot created, copy and paste that text into Wikipedia. I think for all the reasons, especially what Ximena was talking about, students just do not have the AI expertise, the Wikipedia expertise, and the subject matter expertise to kind of ensure that that content that they are adding to Wikipedia is really accurate and is actually improving Wikipedia. So that said, like, again, we recognize that there are ways in which AI tools can help students. So some of the ways in which we think students can use generative AI to help them with their Wikipedia assignment are and actually one other thing I'll say sort of high level, and this is something that's come out from a lot of conversations that I've had with faculty about generative AI tools, is that it should still be human first. So every part of the Wikipedia assignment, the way we set up the program here at Wiki Education is students kind of progress through a scaffolded assignment where they're doing different steps to kind of build up to their final contribution to Wikipedia. And so at every step, like whatever it is, the student should be the one to take the first pass. So let's say there's one of the early steps of the Wikipedia assignment is, evaluating an article, learning how to actually critique a Wikipedia article to identify content gaps, or ways in which the article could be improved. And so we still want students to take a first pass at that. We want them to be the ones to say, okay, read this article and think critically about, ways in which it could be improved. But then, then go to a chatbot and say, hey, I've read through this article. I think, it could be improved in XYZ ways. Am I missing anything? Right? Is there something I didn't consider? But again, use your brain first, right? Take the first pass. Same with research, right? Do the research, see what you can find on a topic. And generate your bibliography, right? Have the students actually, write their bibliography, but then they can go to, a chat bot and say, are there sources I've missed, I haven't considered. Another way is, let's say you do find a source of information, but you can't find where it is. You don't know how to locate it. We've actually seen that things like generative AI can be really successful in helping students like find the right database. Say, oh yeah, it lives in this particular database and you can download it here. And then lastly, we've had some really interesting use cases of of like AI tools being used for translation. I think, Joseph, you referred to this as well. So we had one faculty have a lot of success having their students kind of triangulate. It was a translation project. So it was a course, like a foreign language course. And the students still did the first pass. They still did the first attempt at the translation. And then they used a combination of Google Translate, ChatGPT, and DeepL, which is another translation tool, to kind of, drawing from all three of those plus the student's initial, take on it, to get the best translation possible. So, again, it's a brainstorming tool. It's a checking tool, but it really, really does not work well as a tool to actually draft content onto Wikipedia.
Thank you, Helaine, for that summary. Does that resonate with the other professors here on our panel?
Yeah,
I see head nods. Jump in
chat,
there.
in the short, my policy for students is query, don't copy. And you also butt sometimes up against the plagiarism issue, because I've had students who, a very good student, said he wrote the essay, the report, and then he asked AI to write the introduction to the piece. And it did so, and I would not have known except that Turnitin's plagiarism detector saw that some of the text was verbatim. And actually, I believe the student that he did not intentionally plagiarize, copy like 2 sentences verbatim, but it still ended up in the AI content. So it can be complicated and very dangerous and very risky. And sometimes I use the examples of people who have been caught using AI, for instance, the former president of Harvard. There's also been a couple of lawyers. And so I say, we have to be careful. I mean, you might do poorly in this class, but you also need to be savvy about this for when you are out there outside of the classroom.
Joseph, just to follow up on that, and I think, I think that's Wiki Education's approach, thinking as well, is that I think most students actually, most of the students we support, I think mean well, but they just genuinely don't understand like the limitations of AI at this point, and don't necessarily know how to use it well, and don't understand that it's, going to produce plagiarized content or whatever it might be. And so that's where we're hoping to like give them some of the, some of the training and some of the education to really help them understand like where AI just fails, or doesn't do the greatest job.
The point about plagiarism is real, by the way. They keep telling us that, this is a generative novel machine, but every so often it just copies and presents it to you as if it is novel. It happened to one of my students also in this particular assignment.
Yeah, I think emphasizing for students that, just because it came out of a chatbot doesn't mean it's not plagiarized and you can't get in trouble for plagiarism, right? Is an important lesson. And I think, as Helaine said, we at Wiki Education are trying to sort of bridge the gap between, certain institutions are definitely very pro AI and certain institutions are very anti AI, and then individual professors are very pro or anti AI. And so finding the sort of common ground among that has been, I think, one of the challenges. And so, obviously our training starts with a, defer to the policies of your individual instructor, but sort of here's some guidance, for what Wiki Education recommends on that. And I'm curious for those of you on the panel, how does a Wikipedia assignment differ from a more traditional analytical essay that students write in terms of how they might use generative AI? So I think for a lot of the professors on this call here, they're very used to sort of picking out the difference between a generative AI crafted and a student crafted sort of typical college analytical essay. And how is that different when you're asking students to write a Wikipedia article? Joseph, jump right in.
So I'm happy to do so. So I haven't done this yet. In the spring, I did teach with Wikipedia, my Wikipedia assignment where I asked students to make a contribution. And there's a fair amount of scaffolding throughout the semester. And the thing that I allow my students to choose their own topics. And I think that is the thing I feel most nervous about, actually, because when they can choose their own topics, they tend towards topics that other Wikipedians will suspect as being peacock puffery, POV pushing, whatever it might be. So I haven't tried it yet. I have a list in my syllabus of places you can look, like these are topics that students have, other people, Wikipedians have requested. Here are topics that are red links. Here are the red links with the most visits. And I'm hoping that maybe LLMs would be helpful because it's a lot. And just because it's listed there doesn't mean it's going to be a good contribution for them. But I have a process that I work with students to help them find topics. And it's kind of fun because I just say, well, let's just go through your day. Let's start the day and talk about all the things you do. So for example, I had a student do a travel app, like on the subway, like what times things come and go, because that was one of the first things she checked in the morning, and there was no article. But I hope it would help there. But I haven't tried it yet, and I'd be curious if anyone has that experience.
So one of the pluses, Joseph's mentioned one of the pluses of the technology, it can really parse through a ginormous amount of data, right? Very quickly, and relatively efficiently, right? So what we found out when we were trying to do exactly as Joseph, finding, what are the things that you're interested in? What kind of topics would you like to write for Wikipedia? We suddenly realized that generative AI would allow editors, probably again, experienced editors, to write the umbrella articles that are so hard to write because you really, really have to know so much about the topic to write them, that would connect to a myriad other smaller articles on the subject, because precisely, the bots are capable of doing this, like this grabbing of all the information. And so in a way, that's one way where, these bots could help, right? I don't know if in a classroom, but definitely to experienced editors, you can now write about topics that perhaps you're not, a super expert on, but you are willing to read all the sources, right? And the bot can help you sort of put that together. Because, it can do that. It's one of the qualities that it has. So something to think about, right? Because those umbrella articles are really hard to write. And that's why we don't have too many of them.
Yeah,
right?
and I think that's a really great point, Ximena, about sort of
Yeah.
what are potentially some of the good use cases for it for
So
experienced Wikipedians, right?
to give an example, one of my students wrote about African American film composers, right? I mean, and we had a ton of African American film composers, right, in Wikipedia, but we didn't have one article about them, right? So she found lots of good stuff in the databases, yada yada, right? So yeah, so that is something that we might want to consider, maybe. No.
Yeah, and I think it gets back to that sort of nexus of making sure you have the sort of subject matter expertise and the Wikipedia expertise to be able to identify that as well. Kaylea, I'm curious of sort of your thoughts on this question around sort of how a Wikipedia assignment differs from a traditional analytical essay in terms of using generative AI tools.
Yeah, so I think the way I teach might be a little bit of an outlier here because when I ask students to write essays on their own, I ask them very similar things than when they're asked to write a Wikipedia article. I want them to make a new contribution to knowledge rather than synthesizing sort of something back at me. I want them to use great sources. I want them to think creatively. I want them to really engage with their topic. So I don't see the two assignments as really different, in part because my analytical essay assignments are oriented toward the creation of new knowledge in ways that I think move them forward. I do think that the sort of overall sort of visibility of a Wikipedia article is so much different than an article that you turn in, or that an essay you turn into your instructor. But I try to steer away from the kinds of assignments that only have me as an audience. The alternative, or the exception rather to that, is when I ask students to write reflective essays. And reflective essays written with generative AI are typically trash because they don't know what you think or what you've experienced or what you've done in your life, right? So if you're asking students to be reflective, then on their life experience, they're not going to get a good result out of generative AI, because the moment I ask them about, the puppy that died when they were 7, they're like, oh, I think it was a cat, like they're reflecting on experiences they didn't have at that point. So a few questions from me will sort of poke holes in that particular example. But I think that I see more similarity between a lot of analytical work that I ask students to do and their Wikipedia essay, because I'm really oriented to artifacts that live outside of the classroom, that have a public audience or that have an external audience, rather than an internal, you're only talking to me, except for in those kind of reflective cases where everything comes out in discussion basically afterwards. I do think that we should talk some about ethical positions and kind of conscientious objectors in particular, because I think the sort of ethical space around AI is pretty broad. And I have had students, given my sort of learning objectives for a particular assignment, say, hey, I actually object to some of those learning objectives. I object to what you're doing in this particular part of the course, and I don't want to do it. In fact, I won't do it. Like, we can't really talk about it. I won't do it. And so thinking about to what extent is use of this particular technology an actual part of my learning objective versus where am I asking them to learn something different, I think is important, because I want to always leave space for those conscientious objectors to, like, the furthest possible extent that I can. There comes a point in every class where you're like, I can't follow you all the way there. But I want to leave space for those conscientious objectors. I think
Kaylea, have
a
you
great
had
example.
conscientious objectors? You've actually
I
had people say,
have.
I don't
Yeah,
want
I
to do the
have.
generative AI.
Yes.
Yes. The particular student I'm thinking of, I have her face right here. She was a writer in fan fiction communities, and she said, "I took a pledge. I will not use this. I'm seeing too many authors who I care about harmed by this, and I won't do it. I'm a photographer and a fan fiction writer, and I won't do it." So I had to respect that position and think about, to what extent do I really want them to use the tool and understand the tool through use versus achieve some other set of sort of learning activities. One great example, and I think you touched on this, Joseph, is the ability to use sort of generative AI for feedback on like peacock words. I feel like students are particularly challenged when they're told that they need to edit their article for tone or for encyclopedic tone. I've seen students really struggle with that. They're like, "What do you mean my tone is promotional?" I'm like, "You sound like a social media influencer. I'm so sorry. You can't write like that on Wikipedia. You just can't do it." But they swim in an environment full of that sort of linguistic habits. Um, so that's a place where generative AI can really help them. It works best if you give it the answer, right? You're like, "This is the policy." You paste in the policy, and this is what I wrote. Help me follow the policy better by making a revision. And it'll say like, "Oh yeah, these 10 words, these are not the right things." The interesting thing, I think, is that particular peacock or tone checking activity is something that's now available as a small language model from Wikimedia. You can run a tone check without using an LLM, which I think is much more, it has a lower environmental cost and an infrastructural cost, right? So this particular very valid use case can be done in a totally different way. You don't have to use the LLM for your tone check. You can use the Wikipedia model for your tone check and get the same kinds of sort of ultimate goal of getting some feedback. Thanks.
Thanks, Kaylee. And I think to broaden this out and to tie it into a question that we got in the chat, which this is a reminder, we're coming up, we've got about 15 minutes left. So if anyone has any questions that they want to ask our panelists, please enter them in the Q&A box. But the attendee writes, given that most of the Gen AI products are created by tech companies with business goals that may not align with the learning goals and the goals of librarians and educators, how do you teach about the potential socio-political influences or censorship on outputs, especially considering how black box these systems are, and how does this impact Wikipedia's commitment to neutrality? So I think that's, Kaylee, right along in line of what you were talking about, right? Is obviously there's some conscientious objectors. And I think, Helaine, we have talked about, sort of if students, I think there's two sort of ends of the spectrum, right? The conscientious objectors who are never going to use generative AI no matter what you ask them to do. And then there's the students who will always use it no matter if you ask them not to do it, right? And I think, how do we sort of navigate for that kind of middle ground where most of the students sit who are interested in finding ways to make their lives easier, but are not going to do something potentially wrong if they can't help it, right? So I'd love to hear sort of any thoughts from our panelists on that question.
Well, we're very lucky to have Elon Musk providing the many examples of what can go wrong, whether it's a Mecha Hitler or whatever it might be. We actually don't have to look that far for examples of what's going to go wrong. I think perhaps someone earlier in the chat talked about biases. I think it was Richard. And, before we could kind of pretend that we were striving for neutrality or whatever it might be, some sort of type of objectivity. But now it's pretty clear how these systems can be as biased as the designers want them to be, and their interests might not exactly be our own. So I say that with some irony, of course, but there's plenty of examples now of what can go wrong and how this can be FUBAR.
I think the one thing that the students, we have a whole class that's all about ethics, right? Once we have tested the tools for this, that, and the other, we have a discussion. And one of the things that shocked them the most is to know how inaccurate they are. Right now, well, the time when we were doing this, I think, OpenAI had done a study, and it was something like 47.2 or 42.7 accuracy. And then by the time that we were done, it was like 52% for Gemini. So, a coin toss in accuracy. That's not very good, right? And so they were kind of shocked about that. And so just things, like it looks like it's accurate, but is it? And we talk about probably one of the scariest things is the things that they omit, right? So they're doing your summary of whatever. They skip stuff. We know this because we've tested it with, texts that we have read, and then we see the summaries and they're like, wait, it's missing this part that is really important. And I'm like, uh-huh. So if you don't know the text, you don't know if the summary is correct. So, so they're very limited. And as you said, Elon Musk is providing excellent examples, but I feel like a lot of people still think that they're accurate when they're not, at all.
Yeah, I think that's very true, Ximena. And I think part of our role is engaging with students around understanding the opportunities and the limitations of these tools, right? And I think, the, the sort of additional stakes of writing something for Wikipedia can be a good opportunity for students to engage with that, right? I think, we've heard over and over again for the, 15 plus years we've been doing this program, right? That, students are way more motivated to write for Wikipedia than they are a traditional essay, because it's something, that has meaning out in the real world, and they share a link with their parents, or they talk about it in a job interview, or put it in on their resume, and it's some sort of, kind of real world engagement, and raises the stakes for them in a way that increases the motivation. And so I think generative AI adds an interesting wrinkle to that, and sort of how do we, provide that opportunity for them where they're, engaging with things and with tools in a way that that are effective for their long-term learning outcomes without blurring those sort of ethical lines, is a critical and an interesting question for the future here.
And let me throw in one more.
Yeah.
So you tell the bot, write this in, Wikipedia style, you explain the Wikipedia style, and then it gives you an essay. Several of my students actually wrote articles that are essay style, and I'm like, you didn't realize that this is, and because again, they accept what they have been given, and the bot, the way that it's been, set up, it's, if you look at the way that it answers questions, it likes essay structures, right? With a conclusion, right? And so even though you say, I want this as a Wikipedia article, sometimes they decide not to do it, and they go back to their default, And if you don't know, there you are. So, no.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Let me go to the chat here and get another question here. So we have a question on what is Wikipedia policy on the use of generative AI. Does any one of our Wikipedia panelists want to take that particular question, or would you like me to take that question? Me. All right. So I think there's like the conversation on generative AI is evolving. I think the Wikipedia conversations in the community around generative AI are also evolving. So there's a page that you can type WP:/LLM. I'm sure somebody will drop a link to it in the chat. Is a essay that Wikipedians are discussing around kind of what is related to Wikipedia and large language models. And sort of that is the sort of community central discussion place on this. There is not a formal policy that has been adopted beyond a prohibition on using AI generated images for anything other than if you are writing a Wikipedia article about a notable AI generated image, you can use that image in order to educate the people about what the article is even about. But I think that's a sort of good way of drawing a sort of distinction between that or not. But there's ongoing discussions. I think generative AI is a moving target, and these tools develop and change daily. And so making sure that, we're all maintaining the appropriate sort of recognition of how things change and how things affect then Wikipedia policy is an important part of our work at Wiki Education, as well as the work of all of the professors that we're working with as well. And yeah, any other thoughts on that?
I was going to add that I feel like Wikipedians have actually been kind of on the forefront of thinking about how to use machine learning tools and language models. That if you dig into the community perspective, folks have been engaging with how do we use this tool to help us out for a really long time. Even though the hype wave sort of broke over maybe the rest of us a little bit later, they were really at the edge, in particular, trying to think about how do we use this to synthesize super long discussions down to a sort of a pithy statement if we don't want to read 700 pages of discussion, etc. So I think that the Wikipedia community is an example of how people engage really directly with the limitations and virtues of a particular technology. But it's also kind of early days even for them. Even though they're ahead of everyone else in a lot of ways, I think it's still very early. So everything's really moving around.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Kaylee. And I will wrap up here on sort of one final question that I think is related. There's a couple questions in the chat about whether the links from the chat will be available afterwards. And yes, Wiki Education will put the recording of this conversation up and send it around to all the registrants, as well as the links that are coming from the chat. I know there's a lot of good stuff in the chat and lots of good resources that were shared. So we want to make sure those get shared out with everyone. But I want to ask one final question here for our panelists, which is in less than 1 minute each here. The landscape with generative AI is changing quickly, but what's one thing that you hope to see happen in relation to its use related to Wikipedia in the next 6 months?
So I can
Joseph, jump right
just
in.
repeat what I said earlier. I hope it helps me help my students find appropriate topics, appropriate sources. Do some tone checking would be great. If that happens, I'd be very pleased.
Okay. Kaylee, Ximena, Helaine.
I could jump in. I think that what I hope to see most is something that I hope for society as a whole, which is that we start to really get through the hype and start to see what these models are really good for and what they're not good for. And I think that one of the ways that we're getting there is through ridicule. Ridicule as praxis is a term that has come up in the Mystery AI Hype Theater 3000 podcast that I linked to in the chat. This notion that if we make fun of it in some way, if we call it slop, if we say, oh my gosh, that's so terrible, that actually is a way that in public we can start to pop that hype bubble. Thanks.
Hey.
Yeah, that's you stole you stole my thoughts here, Kaylee. What I hope that's exactly right, that the students in our program really begin to understand that this is not the be and end all, and that and that they're doing themselves a disservice in some ways by just having it generate text, right, and just really understand what they're losing out on by kind of using it in ways that doesn't that actually doesn't play to AI strengths.
Ximena, any final thoughts?
Well, okay, so it's very complicated because even though some of it is slop, the technology is going up, and changing so quickly that the slop argument may not work in a year or two, right? So I need to be, I am totally with slop, by the way. My class is all about dissuading my students, this sucks, so we go through all of that. But it's hard when they're getting better, and they're really getting better. Like I just used Claude the other day to do some research, the research mode, and I was like, oh, well, guess what? This is not as bad as, say, Perplexity, right? For actual real research. So what I want is for us to keep it real, but also really explain to our students the cost of this technology, right? Like, so if we're going to be using it, we really should be using it for very specific use cases. We shouldn't be like just, playing with it, because unlike other technologies, this one is a really expensive one in so many ways, right? Copyright, etc. Or like we can go down, the environment. And so, yeah, I think that for me, even as the technology will get better, because it is getting better and better, the summaries are getting better, blah, blah, blah. I think that it's still, the cost is too high, right? So trying to have that conversation, and hopefully it sticks. I don't know,
Absolutely.
and encouraging the dissenters, including in your syllabus. You don't have to do this. Absolutely. Feel free to tell me. We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Right? Yes, that is essential.
Absolutely. Well, and I know this conversation was really helpful for many of our attendees, and I found it insightful as well. So I want to close and thank Kaylea and Joseph and Ximena and Helaine for all of their great input, and as well for everyone in the chat who has been posting great links and engaging with this. The speaker series is an ongoing edition that Wiki Education does, and our next one is coming up on Monday, September 15th at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, and it will explore research on student learning outcomes from the Wikipedia assignment. We have another 4 great panelists for that, and I would strongly encourage those of you who are interested in sort of the student learning outcomes aspect of this assignment that we've been talking about today to sign up. And you can go to wikiedu.org/speaker-series, and I think Colleen will post a link to that in the chat to encourage everyone to sign up. For those of you who are post-secondary instructors in the United States and Canada, and if this conversation inspired you to teach, we still have a few spots available for this fall term, but I encourage you to submit your course page as soon as possible, and you can do that at teach.wikiedu.org and click on the little apply button and get your course page submitted. And then if you're interested in learning how to contribute your own expertise to Wikipedia, you can visit learn.wikiedu.org. And thank you so much to all of our panelists for a really great discussion, and our attendees for an active chat throughout the conversation as well. And if we didn't get to your question, my apologies. Feel free to shoot us an email afterwards, and we will get back to you by email. So thank you, everyone.